Today we're going to talk a little bit about different ways to ask questions to bring out some really cool things in people, okay? So first I'm going to go through a training real quick just so you have an idea of like how I ask these questions. You're going to see that these are the kind of questions that I open almost every single call with that I do, and I'm actually going to open it with you guys here right now. So far from the time that you've been here, what has been like some of the highlights that you've experienced at this retreat? So what have been some of the highlights that you've had here? Just shout it out. Don't worry about writing it down or anything, but what are some of the highlights so far? Getting a tattoo. Awesome. Right? A lot of giggling. And there's the giggling. And there it is. Okay, seeing us live for the first time. I like it. So what I just did there is you're gonna understand like the process that I just used right there to ask you guys that question. And I want you to kind of like check in with how you feel after I asked you that question, right? What was your highlight, right? Because of course we had some laughter going around, like everybody's smiling, everybody's energy is a little bit higher right now. And here's the thing, like this is the reason why I really like to teach this lesson to you guys, is because we have the push method, right? And we have the questions that we can ask to pull somebody through a push method. But in order for us to like really master the ability of helping people, we need to have multiple different ways to be able to help them. Like you probably have experienced sometimes when it's kind of hard to get somebody out of the head voice and into the heart, and you ask them a heart-based question and they just keep running back over here and they keep running back over here. And if all you have is one tool, you're like, let me just keep trying to use this tool that's not working, right? Because in reality, they're maybe not open to coaching. But if you have different tools, different ways to ask questions, you can kind of get in sometimes and find different routes. And I've found, and Elizabeth and I have been talking about this on some of our one-on-one calls, is like when you get to the point where you've coached the same person, like you get like in a one-on-one contract and you get to know them, you really get to find out what their pressure points are, what their hard voice is, how you can actually help them by asking powerful questions. And you'll see that some people like high performers, they're not going to want to stay in the head voice long. They're going to be like, this is a waste of time. I need to get into the hard voice, right? And so if you have different ways to ask them questions, when you get to know them and their relationship and like, what drives them, what motivates them, what deters them, what gets them upset, like those kind of things, you actually get to help them even more because you can tap into their strengths and what really helps them, right? So this is another way to be able to do that. Now you heard me talk about like life is 50-50 before, right? So life is 50-50, 50% positive, what we term as positive experiences, and 50% of negative experiences, right? This is like when you get into asking people about head-based questions, you're going down the 50% negative to kind of see what is like the things that are triggering them to go down the path of their head, right? But when you ask them a heart-based question, they start to get into like the positive aspect of things, right? So my question to you is, when you're about to give a presentation, you're about to talk to somebody, you're about to have a conversation about, maybe something difficult, and you want to get their full buy-in, do you think it's best to open with a head-based question, or do you think it's best to open with like a heart-based question where they can now be open to seeing and learning what you're about to see? What do you guys think? So a head-based question will get people's attention. If I wanted your attention, I could use a head-based question, but a head-based question, remember, it goes down to 50% that's like the negative, right? What's broken, wrong, or missing. Now, for the whole rest of the presentation, your brain's going to be like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. This doesn't work for me. This isn't going to work. And now your brain is just continuing to go down that thought spiral. But if I take you to a heart-based approach, right? When I'm like, what is the highlight of your trip here so far? You're like, oh, this happened, and now, believe it or not, your heart is open. And now it's ready to accept anything that I'm going to talk about right now. So you're going to be more likely to see the positives in it, see how it applies to you, and you can set that up by starting off with a question like this, right? So you'll hear me say this a bunch of different times, like on live calls, like, what are you most proud of doing, right? What are some actions that you've taken this week that you're proud of because it's leading you more towards what you want in life, right? Or tell me about a time that you showed up as a really incredible parent and like what kind of impact has that had on you and your family, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm asking you a question where it's like almost impossible to go down your head, right? If I'm like, hey, tell me about a tough situation that you went through that made you stronger for it on the other side. You're typically not just going to go down the head voice. You're going to go down, well, this happened, and this is why I like feel so much more power because of it, and this is what it taught me. now you're like in a different place, right? And you'll see that I ask these questions, intermix it with the push method sometimes, because I want you to just be open to having that conversation, right? And it's kind of a way of mentoring per se, because I'm actually assuming some things about what you did or what you said, and I'm taking you down that path and then just listening to what you're gonna like return back to me, all right? Now there's a process behind this and I'll teach you a little bit about it today, and I want you guys to practice it, but that's the main reason behind it, okay? Now the reason why, or the reason that this kind of like, or an example of this coming up and how it actually worked, I think you guys have heard me talk about the story of British Airlines, right? So if you haven't, basically British Airlines, they were losing people's luggage, all right? It was back in the 80s, they kept losing people's luggage, it was a bad customer experience, and like people didn't want to fly with them anymore. They're like, we're not flying with them because they keep losing our luggage. And so they had a lot of money, and they decided, hey, we're just gonna start figuring out a way of like being able to solve this problem. Like, why are we losing people's luggage, right? Head-based question, right? It's like, what's broken, wrong, or missing? You ask them, why are we losing people's luggage? We typically do this, by the way, with our brains. Ed Milet says, basically, the conversation we're having in our head is in response to the questions that we're asking ourselves, right? So we're asking ourselves a question, we don't realize it, but then we're immediately answering it with it, and usually it's a head-based answer of like, oh, I'm not good enough, this isn't, but really it's like, well, am I good enough to do this? No, I'm not good enough to do this, right? And it's kind of like this back and forth tug of head voices in our head. But what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that, right? Another head-based question. The problem with that is when you are focused on what's broken, wrong, or missing, you won't find solutions, you'll find problems. You'll continue to go down that path. And so they found that when they asked the question of like, why do we keep losing people's luggage? They kept losing people's luggage. Nothing changed. And they're like, what is going on? We're trying to solve this problem. We're firing people, we're removing people, we're putting new training in place. And it's because they were focused on what was broken, wrong, or missing. They ended up hiring, at the time, it wasn't really life coaching because it was in the 80s. It was called appreciative inquiry. That's what it was called back then. And what they did is they brought somebody in who could see it from a different perspective. And instead of focusing on what's broken, wrong, or missing, they asked them, British Airlines, they say, how could you create the most amazing customer experience from the time somebody first connected with you to the time that you drop them off at the airport and with their luggage and their baggage and everything intact? Like, how can you create just the best, most incredible customer experience? And so what they did is they took all their time and energy that they were focused on what was broken, which is like, why are we losing people's bags, to how can we create an amazing customer experience? And now here's the thing, like, what do you do when you're trying to create an amazing customer experience? Well, yeah, for sure. But also, like, when they come to the counter to buy a ticket, like, you're really nice to them. You actually create that experience for them. When they're on the airplane, you give them an extra pillow, an extra blanket. You do all of these things that go above and beyond. And at the end result, you give them their luggage, because if you are giving them a great customer experience, they probably need their luggage, right? So what they notice is not only did they solve the problem, they made their entire business rise up because they were focused on an end result that they really wanted to create. And this is kind of like that process of beginning with the end in mind, which is a lot of things that we talk about in life coaching. But there's a specific way we do this, all right? Now, if I had to like sum this up in like one sentence, what we're going to be talking about today is we want to find the best of the past, the present, and the best of the future. So we want to ask questions that's focused on the best of the past, the best of right now, and the best of the potential for the future, right? And when we can ask questions that are related to that, we pull out some amazing things that we would have never been able to pull out because we're able to ask these questions. I know a lot of you guys got the and sign, right? Where do you think that came from? Yes, and it came from this, because it's not an or, it's an and, right? And it's very distinct because when you're saying or, you're saying there's a right or wrong decision, right? I should do this one or this one. There's one that's better than the other. Getting you to think differently is like, but how could you do both, right? And so when you ask, how can I do both? It is like, we're thinking about the future. How can we excel and do both of these things at the same time? And it just opens you up to like, oh man, I've never thought of it that way, right? This is the same way when we ask about the best of the past, the best of right now, and the best of the future, right? Now, I want to give you guys some questions right now. These are not ones you're going to ask each other. I'm going to give you that in a minute. But I want you to kind of think about these questions in terms of dissecting them and what are some things they assume And what do you like see about these questions that you like want to point out so that we can see how to start creating more of these questions for ourselves, all right? So when we're thinking about the past, here's a great question. How has what you've done in the past set you up perfectly for success in the future? So how has what you've done in the past set you up perfectly for success in the future? Now tell me, what do you guys see about that question? What sticks out to you?
That is wrong.
Say it again. It's not what you did wrong. Not focused on the head, right? More focused on the heart. What else? So how has what you've done in the past set you up perfectly for success in the future? Okay. Did you guys hear that? Literally, because I asked her that question that way, that's what she came out with. She used something that we probably beat ourselves up with. She probably has beaten herself up about that in the past, and she used it as her superpower because of the way that I asked the question. Okay, so that's why it's really important to ask these questions in a very specific manner, because you're using the past and you're literally flipping it around. It's and versus or, right? You're using this thing where you're like, I'm going to beat myself up about it, to be like, this is my superpower. And it's a difference, like a complete 180 switch in that moment, right? Because I asked her the question that way. Now, one of the other things is like, what have you done in the past? It means, I'm assuming you've done something in the past. What if I had asked somebody who didn't do anything in the past? I mean, they'd probably be like, and then you will get some people who do that. They're like, nothing. And you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper, right? Because we all know that people have experienced hard things. That's a part of being a human being, right? Is we all experience hard things. But I don't know. What if I asked my, 8-year-old son, like, what have you done in the past to set you up for success, right? He may not have a question or may not have an answer to that. So for this one, it kind of like assumes that you've done something in the past, right? It also assumes that you want to have success in the future. Because if you don't want to have success, what's the point of that question, right? You're like, I don't want success, right? That's why I asked you guys, and I didn't just ask any random person, because some people don't care about that, right? They just want to work, do the stuff, and then just have time off, right? So asking that to the right audience is important too, because you got to ask it to somebody who you believe wants success, right? Which I know you guys do, because we talk about it a lot, right? Okay, next one. And by the way, this is a powerful one. Extra credit points for you asking this to your spouse, all right? So there's 2 ways you can ask this. When you felt most loved by me, what is it that I'm saying or doing that makes you feel that way? Now you can say loved, but you can also say supported. When you felt most supported by me, what is it that I was saying or doing that made you feel that way? What we did at home is we had this whiteboard, those big whiteboards, put it into 4 corners. One said dad, one said mom, one said Andrew, and one said Alyssa. And then everybody got like different color like Post-its, right? And we were like, it was like at the dinner table, and we're like, okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go through one person at a time, and when that person comes up, I want you to answer this question, all right? So we'll start off with mommy. When you feel most loved by mommy, what is she saying or doing that makes you feel that way? And so I wrote what I said, Andrew wrote what he said, Alyssa wrote, and Teresa wrote for herself too. Like, when I feel like I'm loving myself, what are some things that I'm doing or saying to myself, right? Did it, took it, put it on her square. Then we went to Andrew, then we went to Daddy, then we went to Alyssa. And then now everybody got to keep their little thing of like, hey, Andrew thinks that I love him the most when we're tickling, right? I wanted to punch myself in the face, because I'm like, at the end of watch, I've been working 14 hours, come home, work my business. And he's like, hey dad, you want to tickle? I'm like, not really. Like, let's do that another day. But like, out of all the things, notice Disneyland wasn't there, notice presents, notice Christmas. And I'm like, I should have really taken the time to do that, right? Now he's like 15 and he's like, I don't want to tickle, don't play. So anyway, it's like when you learn that, right? When you ask a question like this, it could feel a little uncomfortable asking this question. I remember the first time I asked this question, because I was a mastermind for dads and husbands who wanted to become better fathers and better husbands, right? And they were like, it's going to be a little weird asking your wife this the first time. And I was like, you know what? But I can call out the elephant in the room, and I can say, hey, listen, like, I want to be a better husband, and I also want to be a better dad. And I'm literally going to, a mastermind at a course to help me become better. And this might be really weird for me to ask you these questions, but I really want to know the answers, because I want to show up better for you, all right? I want to be the best that I can for you. So you don't have to answer these, but if you could, I would love it, because it would show me what I'm doing really well and what I can adjust. And then I'd ask them, and they were totally open to it. They're like, that's not a silly question, right? What's funny though, is once I ask that, now they ask each other it, right? When I use these kind of questions, right? This is the same as like being at dinner table and saying, hey, how was your day today, right? Which is like, when you ask that the 50th time, they're gonna be like, fine, good, fine. But if I'm like, hey, like, what was the funniest thing that happened today? And now my son's like, oh, this girl walked in and she farted on accident, and then like everybody was laughing and we're all laughing, right? But I got to him to re-experience that moment because of the question I asked him. And now he gets to share that with all of us, right? And so it's a different conversation when you ask these level of questions, right? When you feel most loved by me, what is it you're saying or doing that makes you feel that way? What are some things that you see about that question and how it's like phrased in that way that sticks out to you guys? Correct. It is their interpretation from them, right? So you're looking basically kind of at their push method, really saying, what are some of the things that I'm doing? Fact for them, right? What am I doing that's making them feel this way? Sometimes it's what I'm saying. Sometimes it's what I'm doing. Whatever that thing is, you're kind of asking them, when I show up as a fact in your push method, when you look at the feelings, how does that make you feel most supported, right? Now they're telling you. Guess what? We're not guessing anymore then. We're not like, oh my gosh, when I do this thing, like we were talking yesterday, when I make the money, that's when they feel like they're most supported by me, and they could care less, right? They're like, I just want you to, play tickle with me. Or my daughter's like, I just want you to like ask me questions about my anime or whatever, right? And it's like, when you get into there, you're like, I don't have to guess anymore. And I would have guessed way off, right? Because I would have thought of all the things that I was buying them, but they could care less, right? They just wanted like more time with me. So you go to the source, right? The really great takeaway from that one. What else? What else from that question you guys think? When you feel most loved by me, what is it I'm saying or doing that makes you feel that way? So what sticks out to you, how I phrase that question? I'm kind of assuming that I have done something that made you feel loved or supported. Like, I'm not saying like, have I ever supported you, right? Because that's a head-based question. What are they going to say? Oh, I don't know. Like, and it's going to be a weird and awkward thing, right? I'm asking you, when you have felt that way because of me, what is it that I've done? So I'm assuming that I've done something like that, right? It's specific, and I'm getting into the nitty gritty here because how you ask these questions is really important. Because if you ask questions, like it's a head-based question, and we see this also in the M&M sometimes, right? We talk about the M&M asking head-based questions at the right time, asking heart-based questions at the right time, and not intermixing them, because you're going to get different things depending on when you ask them, right? So the question, what's the problem with that? Like in the beginning of the push method, it's a good way of finding from the facts to the story. But as you keep going, if you keep asking that question, it's going to just completely bring up more stories, more head voices, more trauma, more like spiraling out of control. And then you don't know why the person's spiraling. It's because you're asking them more head-based questions. You only want to ask them a question to get one story, and then stop asking them head-based questions. Instead of saying, I've seen this happen a lot, is like, they'll be going through the push method and they'll be like, yeah, and I tried a lot of things before. And for some reason we go, tell me about the things you've tried. But we're focused on more head voice when we ask that, right? We already have a story. And if I'm like, well, tell me about all the things that you have tried, right? And have you ever asked somebody that? They're like, well, I've tried this, and I tried this, and I tried this. And how does that make them feel every single time they continue to go down there, right? And we already have a head voice. We don't need to go anymore, right? So asking them a question related to, well, what have you tried? What hasn't worked? Like all those kind of things is just going to take them further and further and deeper down, right? So we've got to know when to stop asking the head questions and when to just take it through to the end of the push method and then go to the heart-based questions, and not add a heart-based question at a head time or a head-based question at a hard time, right? Because it gets them very confused, and it gets us very confused as well, all right? And then, of course, we want to make sure we also don't coach the action line, which is like you start to have a conversation. You're like, well, which journal? Well, which workout you doing? Well, which this or which that, right? You would take them through the flow of the push method, not just ask them those random questions about their activities that they're doing. Or, oh, so what does your schedule look like? Like, if you're doing that, you're putting the emphasis on the action and not the emphasis on the story, right? So, and these are just all things to like take into consideration. But when you're asking questions the way that we're asking them, that I'm teaching you guys here today, it's not focused on that head-based question. It's focused on like assuming some things and kind of guiding them down the path of what is the different way of like thinking about this. Does that make sense?